Welcome to our second video on learning Python. So in this video, we are going to take a look at the most fundamental concept in Python, which is called object. So Python is an object-oriented language, and everything in Python is an object. And by everything, I mean variables, data types, the functions, everything is an object. But then the question is, what is an object? And then an object is nothing but data and functions packed together as one unit. So what do I mean by this? So let's go back and try to understand that by getting into the Python interpreter. Let me go ahead and launch Python 3. Great. So we have our friendly prompt here. Let me go ahead and increase the font size here. Awesome. And now let's take a variable a and set it to 10, or rather not set it 10, but let's have a string. So let me take Piyush as a string. Now, if I were to ask Python what is the type of this variable, it would say it's a stir. And now the question is, I mentioned that everything is an object, so a itself is also an object. By the way, a side note here, this class keyword, we'll get to that in more depth later. But for now, just know that A is an object. And I mentioned that object is, data and functions back together. Now, let me just give you a hint at this point that Piyush is the data that this object is supposed to hold. And so, at some point we should see that. So I'm going to ask Python to help me understand what stir is, and let's see what Python has to say. So Python is saying that okay, stir is some class. We'll come to class later. But then the interesting piece is that it's talking about some methods that are defined, and methods essentially are nothing but functions that are packed inside of an object. So then the stir, anything that is of the type stir object, would have these methods. And then you can see that what it returns, and we'll come to the self keyword a little later when we are discussing about the class. But right now, just let's take a look at the list of functions that this, so to speak, the object packs inside of it. And we can see there are a lot of functions with the double underscore around them. These, by the way, any function which has double underscores on either side are called the dunder functions, double underscore functions. And then you can see here that there's a capitalized function, there's a case fold function, and a lot more of them. Right, so let's just keep scrolling down. You'll see lower, then strip, partition, replace, are fine. So all of these functions are part of the stir object. Okay, and then now the question is, where is the data stored, right? So it doesn't specifically mention to us where it is storing the data, but within the, trust me on this for now, that within the A object somewhere there is the data Piyush stored. And now, and I'll give you another example of that in a while, but now let me go ahead and try to call some function on the object. And what I mean by that is, let me just quickly doodle on the side here. Uh, so, so somewhere in the memory, there's some memory reserved and is called A. And then, somewhere within that, we have Piyush as the data stored, right? And then all the functions that we looked at, the double underscore functions, there are so many of those. And then we had like, lower, uh, upper, those kind of functions. So now this object then has this data and this function. Now what I want to do is I want to call, let's say, upper as the function, and then I want to say, okay, now on this object, could you call this function? So the question is, we're using a function to manipulate the object itself, and then the question is, how do we, do that? So the way we do that in Python is we take the object, in this case A, and then we step inside of the object using the dot notation. So an A dot would mean, hey Python, I would want you to consider the A object and I want you to step inside of it. And then from inside of it, we wanted to call the upper function or the upper method, so to speak. And okay, so just notice that there are double the opening and closing parentheses here, and that is like a way we call the function. So here you clearly see that it took this data that it had inside of it, and operated this function on top of it. And this is like the output. So now let me give you another example, a more interesting example. And to do that, let me again doodle on the side. So the example that we're going to take a look at is that of a complex number, right? So I'll take C as a complex number, and somewhere inside of it, it will, let me make C as 1 plus maybe 3 j. And so somewhere it should store like the value 1, the value 3, which is the imaginary part, the real part, and then there should be like a lot of functions associated with C. And C, I've been mentioning about A, C would also be an object. And let's just go ahead and explore that. So what's happening here is I'm you know creating a variable which is 1 plus 3j, and then I ask Python, okay, what is the type of this? Then Python comes back and says, okay, it is of the type complex. And then I say, okay, I would want you to help me understand what complex class is, or what complex type data type is. And it says, okay, it creates a complex number from a real part and an optional imaginary part. Then it has got all of these dunder functions as I was mentioning earlier. And then you can see that here at this point it says that, okay, conjugate is one of the functions, and conjugate would essentially negate the imaginary part and give us back like the conjugate of the complex number, the current complex number. And then here you can see that the data descriptors defined here are image and real. So essentially the real parts get stored here and the imaginary part gets stored here. Then with respect to a diagram on the side, what it would mean is that this essentially is, okay, this is the uh, real part, and then this is the image part. And now the question is, can we try to access this and print this? And the answer is yes. Now the way you come out of the help here is by pressing Q. And now that we are out of the help, let me go ahead and try and print uh, the real part. And notice that I'm stepping inside of C as an object, and then I say, okay, I want the value of the variable, so to speak, called real. And if I do that, we see that it is 1.0, which is same as this. And then I'll ask for image, and then it says, okay, it is 3. And now, as we did with the object A here, converted the string into uppercase, let me go ahead and call conjugate conjugate here, and let's see what Python returns us. So yeah, Python creates a conjugate of this, and conjugate simply means that you flip the sign here, and so it has returned back 1 minus 3j. So then essentially the takeaway from this video for you should be that everything in Python is an object, and an object packs with itself some data and some functions. And in the next video, we'll take a look at how we go about creating or defining our own object type. And we have actually taken a look at that in the previous video, which is we discussed like vaguely around what classes are. It's a way of providing like a custom data type, and essentially defining a new object. Object type is nothing but writing a class, and we'll take a look at that in the next video.